Sweden has taken a step that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. In a move that sent clear shockwaves through Moscow, Stockholm announced a major military aid package for Ukraine that directly aims to degrade Russian combat power. This decision reflects not only a shift in Sweden's policy toward the war, but also a historic transformation in its national security doctrine. On May 29, Sweden unveiled its 16th aid package to Ukraine. Unlike earlier packages that mixed humanitarian, economic, and military support, this one is overwhelmingly focused on battlefield impact. Its purpose is explicit: to increase Russian losses and strengthen Ukraine's ability to sustain long-term combat operations. For a country with over 2 centuries of military neutrality, this marks a profound strategic break. Until Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Sweden maintained a foreign policy rooted in neutrality that dated back to the Napoleonic era. The last time Swedish forces participated in a war was in 1814, during the brief conflict with Norway. For generations, neutrality was not only policy but part of Sweden's national identity, supported by a broad public consensus that endured through both world wars. Public attitudes toward military alliances reflected this stance. As recently as 2012, only a small minority of Swedes supported NATO membership. That sentiment shifted gradually as regional security concerns grew, but it was Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine that fundamentally altered public and political thinking. Long-standing fears regarding Russia, rooted in centuries of rivalry in the Baltic region, resurfaced almost overnight. Sweden's caution toward Russia is deeply historical. The two states fought a prolonged and decisive struggle during the Great Northern War in the early 18th century, which ended Sweden's status as a great power and established Russia as the dominant force in the Baltic. Since then, Sweden has consistently viewed developments in Russia through a lens of strategic vulnerability. This awareness shaped Swedish military planning long before the current war. Sweden developed extensive experience in undersea operations in the Baltic Sea and invested heavily in coastal defense. Its air force, including the Gripen fighter program, was designed specifically to counter Russian capabilities. Even cultural memory reflected these anxieties, particularly in strategically exposed areas such as Gotland, long viewed as a likely target in any Baltic conflict. Russia's invasion of Ukraine brought these latent concerns to the forefront. Within months, Sweden applied for NATO membership and began accelerating military assistance to Kyiv. Like Germany, it abandoned long-held restrictions on providing lethal aid. Initial contributions included anti-tank weapons, air defense systems, and light vehicles, but the scale and ambition of support steadily expanded. By early 2023, Sweden had demonstrated a willingness to commit resources at a level disproportionate to its size. On the first anniversary of the war, Stockholm announced the donation of Leopard 2A5 tanks, signaling a readiness to provide high-end armored capabilities. This approach laid the groundwork for even more significant commitments later. Sweden's most recent package, valued at approximately $1.23 billion, must be understood in context. Sweden's entire defense budget in 2023 stood at under $9 billion. Since the invasion began, total Swedish aid to Ukraine has exceeded $4 billion. This represents a remarkable allocation of national resources, underscoring how seriously Stockholm views the Russian threat. The pace of these aid packages has also accelerated. In late February, Sweden announced what was then its largest package, worth over $680 million. That package included combat boats, artillery ammunition, air defense systems, anti-tank weapons, and logistical support. Only weeks later, Stockholm approved additional assistance focused on protecting Ukraine's energy infrastructure from Russian missile and drone strikes. The May 29 package was nearly double the size of the February contribution. While it did not include fighter aircraft, it delivered critical capabilities Ukraine urgently needs. Swedish officials emphasized that the equipment reflects Kyiv's highest operational priorities, particularly ammunition and air defense assets that can shape the battlefield in the near term. Although Sweden chose not to transfer fighter jets at this stage, the substance of the package remains formidable. Stockholm clarified that Ukraine prefers to concentrate on integrating the F-16 program rather than dividing resources between multiple aircraft platforms. While the possibility of Gripen transfers remains open in the future, Swedish officials acknowledged that adding another fighter system now would overburden Ukrainian logistics and training pipelines. Instead, Sweden focused on capabilities that can immediately influence the battlefield. One of the most critical contributions is a significant quantity of 155mm artillery ammunition. While exact numbers were not disclosed, the additional shells are expected to push Ukraine's total stockpile well beyond 2 million rounds. This volume is sufficient to sustain high-intensity operations well into 2025 and alleviate the severe artillery shortages that have constrained Ukrainian forces. Sweden is also transferring RB-99 AMRAAM missiles, functionally equivalent to the AIM-120. These missiles are being adapted for ground-based air defense systems, most likely Ukraine's NASAMS batteries. This addition directly addresses Russia's increasing reliance on tactical aviation to support ground advances, particularly after gains around Avdiivka. By reinforcing Ukraine's air defenses, Sweden's aid forces Russian aircraft to operate at greater risk and limits their freedom of action. Another major element of the package is the transfer of Sweden's remaining PBV-302 infantry fighting vehicles. Though no longer in frontline Swedish service, these vehicles are well suited to Ukraine's needs as it forms new brigades. Rather than storing aging equipment, Stockholm opted to refurbish and modernize the vehicles before delivery, along with spare parts, maintenance equipment, and ammunition for their 20mm cannons. The PBV-302 provides protected mobility for infantry units, carrying up to 8 soldiers with armor capable of withstanding medium-caliber fire. While not comparable to modern IFVs like the CV-90, these vehicles fill a critical gap for Ukrainian formations that require transport under fire. Their donation reflects a pragmatic focus on quantity, sustainability, and immediate operational value. Beyond combat vehicles and munitions, Sweden is contributing fuel transport trucks, logistical equipment, and continued maintenance support for previously delivered systems. The package also includes satellite communication terminals, improving Ukraine's command and control capabilities across dispersed formations and contested environments. One of the most strategically significant elements of the aid package is Sweden's decision to provide 2 Saab ASC-890 airborne early warning and control aircraft. These platforms dramatically enhance Ukraine's ability to detect incoming missiles, drones, and aircraft, while also enabling more effective coordination of air defense and offensive operations. Swedish officials described these aircraft as having the greatest potential impact of any single component in the package. This decision was not without cost. The ASC-890s represented Sweden's entire AEW&C fleet, and their transfer creates a temporary gap in Swedish territorial surveillance. Stockholm acknowledged this vulnerability but framed it as a calculated risk. Swedish leadership argued that weakening Russia in Ukraine reduces long-term threats closer to home, a view echoed by several European leaders. To offset the loss, Sweden plans to acquire newer Global Eye airborne surveillance aircraft and accelerate domestic defense investments. Military spending is set to rise sharply over the coming years, exceeding NATO's 2% of GDP benchmark. These investments are intended not only to replenish donated equipment but to expand Sweden's industrial capacity to sustain prolonged support for Ukraine. Sweden has also authorized Ukraine to use donated weapons against targets on Russian territory, signaling a further departure from restraint. Financial mechanisms included in the package aim to speed future aid deliveries and ensure continuity of supply, reinforcing Sweden's commitment to long-term involvement rather than one-off contributions. Sweden's expanding support must be understood within the broader framework of a war of attrition. In late 2023, Estonia's Ministry of Defense released an assessment arguing that Ukraine could decisively shift the balance by 2025 if it managed to kill or incapacitate approximately 100,000 Russian troops in a single year. The logic was not centered on manpower shortages alone, but on training capacity. Russia may possess vast reserves of mobilizable personnel, but its ability to properly train them is finite. Estonian analysts estimated that Russia can adequately train roughly 260,000 troops per year. This supports an active force of around 420,000 deployed soldiers in Ukraine. If casualty rates rise beyond that threshold, Russia is forced to send undertrained replacements to the front, degrading combat effectiveness and creating a feedback loop of higher losses and weaker units. Sweden's artillery ammunition deliveries directly support this strategy by sustaining Ukraine's firepower at scale. At the same time, Ukraine must reduce its own losses to maintain operational momentum. Here, Sweden's contributions may have the greatest long-term impact. While Western partners have trained over 100,000 Ukrainian troops since the invasion began, training quality and duration have varied widely. Many Ukrainian soldiers have received only 5 weeks of preparation before entering combat, far less than the standard training cycles used by NATO armies. This gap is particularly severe at the officer level. According to the Estonian assessment, Ukraine currently struggles to conduct coordinated operations above the company level. Brigade-level maneuvers remain limited, restricting exploitation depth to roughly 1,200 meters during offensives. This constraint was one of the understated factors behind the failure to convert tactical breakthroughs into strategic gains during the Zaporizhzhia offensive, even after penetrating multiple Russian defensive lines. Russia, by contrast, was able to rapidly reposition reserves supported by helicopter-borne mobility and artillery fire, halting Ukrainian advances. Without adequately trained staff officers capable of synchronizing larger formations, Ukraine's forces were unable to sustain momentum. Sweden's decision to assist in establishing a Ukrainian Defense Research Institute aims to address this structural weakness over time by improving doctrine development, operational planning, and officer education. The long-term nature of this effort cannot be overstated. Training institutions take years to mature, but their effects compound over time by reducing casualties, improving coordination, and enabling more ambitious operations. Combined with improved command and control systems and airborne surveillance assets, these reforms could gradually shift Ukraine's force structure from tactical resilience toward operational competence. Sweden's political calculus reflects an understanding that the war's outcome will not be decided by a single offensive, election cycle, or aid package. Stockholm has committed to providing approximately $7 billion in support over 3 years, signaling that its engagement is designed to outlast short-term political uncertainty elsewhere. Increased domestic defense spending ensures that Sweden can replenish its own stockpiles while continuing to support Ukraine without exhausting its military capacity. This posture carries strategic implications beyond Sweden itself. As one of NATO's newest and smaller members, Sweden's willingness to accept proportional risk sets a precedent. Continued Swedish support at significant domestic cost places pressure on larger allies to maintain their commitments, particularly if external aid flows fluctuate due to political changes. For Sweden, geography removes the luxury of strategic distance. Without an ocean separating it from Russia, Stockholm views Ukraine as the forward line of defense. Defeating or weakening Russian forces on Ukrainian soil is perceived as preferable to confronting a more confident and experienced adversary closer to home. This historical perspective explains why Swedish leaders remain undeterred by temporary vulnerabilities created by their aid decisions. Russia may hope that fatigue will fracture Ukraine's coalition over time. Sweden's actions suggest that this assumption is flawed. With a robust defense industry, rising military investment, and strong public consensus, Sweden is positioned to remain a reliable partner for Ukraine well beyond the immediate phases of the war. In strategic terms, Sweden's transformation from centuries-long neutrality to active military engagement represents one of the most consequential shifts triggered by the invasion of Ukraine. Its aid does not merely add equipment to the battlefield, it alters the tempo, sustainability, and institutional foundations of Ukraine's war effort. Whether this proves decisive will depend on time, coordination, and political endurance, but Sweden has made clear that it intends to remain engaged for the duration.